I don't really need to learn Bulgarian. I live in Bansko, and here enough people speak English so that I can get by. My landlord speaks English. The service providers that come into our home for the most part speak English. Even the delivery guys who bring my weekly food order from eBag, pretty much all of them speak English. And the reality is, a lot of expats here get by just fine without ever learning any Bulgarian. It works just fine for them until it doesn't. Bulgarian is not an easy language to learn. It uses the Cyrillic alphabet, which quite frankly looks like a bunch of numbers and gobbledygook, with the exception of a handful of letters that I actually do recognize. When I was in Ecuador, I picked up on Spanish much easier. It's just that that Cyrillic alphabet can be very intimidating. And because a high number of Bulgarians who live here do speak English, it can be very tempting to slide into complacency and just not bother to learn Bulgarian. And on top of that, most Bulgarians are very forgiving if you don't speak the language. My landlord is bilingual, and he says, you don't need to learn Bulgarian. You can get by here. Enough people speak English so that you can get your daily business done. And if you have to go somewhere where they don't speak Bulgarian, I will go with you. Who can turn down that kind of an offer? Have I mentioned how much I love our landlord? And it's very true, because Bansko is a tourist and a digital nomad hub. People make their living here dealing with those two populations. And because of that, it behooves the locals to speak some English. And many of them speak English quite well. We had an electrician come in to install some lights in our apartment. Perfect English. Ditto the internet installer. The lady at the post office speaks English. It seems like everywhere I go, I run into English speakers, which makes life a whole lot easier. The only two places that come to my mind where we haven't run into English speakers, number one, the local pet store. She only speaks Bulgarian, but you know, between Google Translate and pointing, and I'm a very good pantomimer, we get along just fine. And then the other place, oddly enough, where I did not encounter an English speaker was at the local library in town here, which quite frankly doesn't really impact me because they have about 2 shelves of English language books, so probably won't be spending a lot of time there anyway. I very much appreciate the dual language capabilities of people in my town. Here's what going into a shop, for the most part, looks like for me. I go in, and because I'm a very good mimic, I can say something like Dobar den or Duba utro, which is good day or good morning. And usually, because I get that fairly close to the pronunciation, what happens is that the shopkeeper launches into a stream of Bulgarian, some of which I pick up, most of which I do not. And inevitably, my next thing out of my mouth will be "Govoriš li angliski," which I think approximates more or less, do you speak English? And then more often than not, they do, and then we launch into a 100% English conversation. So again, why do I need to bother to learn Bulgarian? Oh, and one little side note to this story is I have found that people, locals, are so delighted when you launch into the smallest amount of Bulgarian, just the littlest attempt. And they are very encouraging, and they optimally, if I meet somebody who corrects me kindly, then that's even better. But the thing is, you mentioned just the shortest phrase, Dobar den, in Blagodaria, thank you, in Bulgarian, and they praise you up, down, and sideways. I swear, speaking a little Bulgarian in this country is very good for the ego. I had an older next door neighbor when we lived in Plovdiv, and she was very pleasant, didn't speak any English, and I could just walk by her and say, "Asum Americanka," I am American. And she would like practically give me a standing ovation. It was just great. I never really progressed beyond that phrase with her. I have a lot of wonderful interactions with people just by speaking a few token words of Bulgarian. This morning, I went to my favorite produce store, and I forgot my phone. And when I got there, so typically it's a very tiny store. They keep their products out on the sidewalk. And I needed apples. That's all I needed to buy was apples, which fortunately is probably the one produce word that I know. And I went to where the apples usually are, and there was no produce out there because it's so cold out today. I mean, I did a double take on the sidewalk. I'm like, am I in the right spot? So obviously when it's that cold, they don't leave their produce on the sidewalk. So I went into the store, and it's this tiny little shop. It's crammed to the rafters normally. And then on top of that, they had all their outdoor products indoors. And I just stood there like trying to take it all in. All this stuff is piled up to the ceiling. And the man that works there doesn't really speak any English. And I just looked at him. I'm sure he could tell by the look on my face. And I just said, jablki, which is apples. And he pointed and said, tuk, which is here. And I was like, okay, that was almost an entire conversation. And I went over and I found the apples and I put them in a bag. And then I went to check out. And just as a backstory, Bulgaria is in the process of converting to the euro. So for this month of January 2026, merchants are obligated to accept payments in either euro or Bulgarian leva. And I am trying to get rid of all my Bulgarian money so I don't have to deal with it. So I've been paying for everything with all this Bulgarian leva. So he looked at me and he said, euro? And I was like, I knew what that meant. And I said, leva, okay. I could have said leva dubre, which is not grammatically correct. But either way, he would have known what I meant. Is it okay? Is it good to pay with leva? And he shakes his head yes. And I gave him 6 leva, and I said shest when I gave it to him. And he gave me back the change. And I said, who about then? And I went, have a nice day. And I went about my day feeling quite smug about myself. These little interactions really go a long way to make us feel like we are fitting in here. So, as much as I appreciate everybody bending over backwards for me to speak English, I don't want to slide into that trap of complacency where I am only hanging out with English speakers and interacting with English-speaking merchants, even though I have to admit it does make my life in that moment a whole lot easier. And there's a number of reasons why I do want to bother to learn to speak Bulgarian. And here are 7 of them. Number 1, not speaking any Bulgarian or very little Bulgarian for me is very anxiety inducing. Your phone rings, you look down, you see it's a Bulgarian exchange, and you automatically start this heart pounding, oh my gosh, should I answer? Are they going to speak English? What should I do? Maybe I should just let it go to voicemail. Well, I'm expecting a Temu order. It could be my delivery. And you go through all these gyrations in your head. And eventually, I always end up answering the phone. And hello. And of course, they launch into Bulgarian. And I'm at the point now where I can at least pick out a couple of words, which is very reassuring compared to where I was several months ago. And generally what happens is I will ask that question. Well, what I can say is, Asuma Americanka, I am American, do you speak English? And then it's about a 50-50 crapshoot of whether or not they do. If they launch into English, then all the better. If they speak Bulgarian, they tend to slow it way down, so I can at least, usually I have an inkling of what the call is about if I'm expecting a delivery. And I understand most numbers, so if somebody tells me that they'll be there in 10 minutes, I can usually tease that out. But it is a struggle and it is a challenge for me, and just the constant low-level anxiety of going out somewhere or the phone rings and not knowing if I'm going to be able to communicate what it is I need to communicate just really induces anxiety for me. And I don't even think about the big picture stuff. Suppose we had to go to the emergency room in the middle of the night. In all likelihood, we would have to find an English speaker either at the hospital or to come with us. So not speaking the language as comfortable as the locals make it for us, not speaking the language just makes me anxious. Number 2, You miss a lot of practical information when you don't have a grasp on the language. Now, make no mistake about it. I do not aspire to be fluent in Bulgarian. I don't think I will ever understand the nuances, probably not the humor. That's a fairly advanced level of language learning. But there's a huge difference between fluency and absolutely clueless. When you don't speak the language at all, you can miss some very practical, basic information. Yes, no, tomorrow, thank you, excuse me. Basic things that you need in the course of a day. I had situations when I first came here when I would be in the grocery store and people would stop and block the aisles, and I didn't know how to say excuse me. And people don't seem to be as aware in their peripheral vision as Americans are. I think it's a personal space thing. Americans are all like, give me my 3-foot bubble. And so I would sometimes just stand there behind people, or I'd walk around and go around the other aisle because I literally would not know how to say, excuse me. I know how to say that now. So you miss out on a lot of practical applications of things if you don't have some basic Bulgarian vocabulary. Knowing a little Bulgarian increases the odds that you're going to pick up enough words to understand maybe the gist of the conversation, and it makes the odds of responding intelligently just a little bit higher. Number 3, speaking Bulgarian, I think, facilitates trust. It says, I'm not just a tourist, I live here, and I'm trying my darndest to assimilate, even if I'm not very good at it. Bulgaria is now my home. Fortunately, as I've already alluded, in Bulgaria, making the effort matters more than proficiency. Thank God. And what I hope it conveys to people is, hey, look, I'm not here just for the cheap banitsa. I'm not here to take and take and take. I'm here to embrace your culture. I want to give as much as I can, and I want to embrace your culture. And what better way to do that than to at least learn the basics of the language? It seems to me that a few basic phrases helps transition the dynamic from transactional to relational. And Bulgarians are all about relationships. And relative to that is number 4, is that speaking some Bulgarian tends to have Bulgarians take you a little more seriously. Plus, they want to help. So they will interact with you solely to help you and try to understand. Sometimes when I can't speak any Bulgarian at all and I just launch into English, I sometimes feel kind of brushed aside, or it's an awkward conversation. And that could be me projecting something onto the conversation because I feel awkward when I can't participate at all in the conversation. But it just feels to me like Bulgarians take me a little bit more seriously, maybe treat me with a little bit more respect if I attempt, or at least greet them in their native tongue. I'm not saying that speaking a little bit of Bulgarian has Bulgarians treating me like family, but a few words in the local language it helps the interaction flow from where I sit. It doesn't make things perfect, but for me, it makes them a whole lot less mentally exhausting. For me, speaking a little bit of the language, it changes I don't know what the word is, my internal narrative. I start to feel like somebody who is here for the long haul. I think when I have to speak English right off the bat, what that says to the person I'm speaking to, regardless of how gracious they are about my not speaking Bulgarian, is I live here, but I'm from there. It's kind of what that says. Learning the language, even a little, changes that dynamic, in my mind anyway, to I'm here long enough so that I feel like I want to participate. The psychological shift in your head changes, and it shifts away from I'm an outsider, because that gets really old after a while. I think that's one of the biggest things that you have to work around and grapple with when you are living in a foreign country where their first language is not your first language. Is this constantly feeling like I really don't belong here, I'm an outsider, I'll never really fit in. And the best way to at least attempt to fit in is to learn some words in the local language. Number 6, this would apply to any language. Accepting the fact that I suck at something is a very good lesson in humility. You know, between you and me, as I've said before, I'm not aiming to be fluent in Bulgarian. There's way too many tenses, verb conjugations, nuances. There is exceptions. There is just no way that I see myself with the remaining lifespan I have becoming fluent in Bulgarian. And I'm okay with that. And oddly enough, comparing Bulgarian to learning Spanish one more time, when I was living in Ecuador and was learning Spanish, I didn't give myself that same grace. And I think it's because Spanish was a little easier to learn. More or less, the sentence structure follows English, so I at least had that part down. It's just an easier language. So therefore, I felt like I was compelled to become fluent in the language, which I never did. We were only there for 18 months, and I don't know that I ever would have anyway. But I put an extra level of pressure on me because I felt I didn't want to be that American that just shows up and just doesn't bother to learn anything in the local language. And I felt like I wanted to go about my day and converse 100% in Spanish once I got outside the home. And I think that made me make more mistakes. And when I did make mistakes, I beat myself up over it. It's like, oh my God, I knew that. I knew that that was the wrong conjugation. Why did I just say that? The story that comes to mind about that was when I was in Ecuador and I was talking to one of the gardeners in our complex, and we were walking and talking, and I was talking in Spanish, and he asked me how many children I had, something about how many kids I had. And I have 2 daughters, and Jeremy has a daughter, so we collectively say we have 3 daughters. And what I said to him was, I have 13 daughters. And he looked at me, and I didn't catch it right away. And he looked at me, and his eyes got really big. and he repeated it. And I think even then I said, see. And then somewhere along the line, it dawned on me, and I was like, oh, no, 3. And so those are just things that happen when you're learning a language. And I knew the difference between 3 and 13. But sometimes you know things in your head, but you're in the midst of a conversation and it just doesn't come out of your mouth the right way. In Bulgarian, I can say the equivalent of me not speak Bulgarian good, and people will be delighted and they will know what I mean. And at this point in my education, I'm totally fine with that. People get the gist of what I'm saying. Number 7 is more of a side benefit, but I'm going to throw it in there anyway in case this is a motivator for some people. Learning a second language is supposed to stave off the odds of dementia. And, you know, you get to a certain point in life, and the more that you can do that, the more effort you're going to put in. So while that side benefit is not the main reason why I am learning Bulgarian, it's a nice little side benefit. Haris for me. I like it. I think that means I like it. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. Bottom line is this. I'm not trying to pass off as Bulgarian. That's actually pretty darn funny. But I would like to not have a panic attack every time the phone rings or I have to run out to buy vitamins. That's a good mindset to have. Keeps expectations low and therefore easier to meet. So learning the language matters. My advice to any American or English speaker who's thinking about becoming an expat in Bulgaria or anywhere where English is not the primary spoken language, learn a few phrases before you ever get on the plane. And when you do get here, there's a lot going on when you first get to a new country. Generally, it's totally overwhelming to take on housing and find things and find your way around and buy health insurance and go through the residency process and all the things that you have to do to live a functional life. But if it's possible, carve out even 15 to 20 minutes a day and just work on some phrases. There are some great programs out there. I use Bulgaro. I have taken classes, very small group classes. At this point in my education, that is not the best way for me to learn. I need to digest things, kind of roll them around in my head, practice them, and commit them to memory. And that takes me not an inordinately long time to do that, but long enough where I feel if I'm in a group, I'm holding up the rest of the class. I do much better when I'm doing some online learning, but that is just me. But do make the effort to assimilate into the culture of where you're going by learning at least some aspects of the language. If nothing else, put a few phrases. Where is the bathroom? Thank you very much. Excuse me. That's a good one if you want to get around people in the grocery store. Put them into Google Translate and just commit them to memory. You'd be amazed at how far those kinds of phrases will take you. So no, I don't need Bulgarian to survive here. In a purely practical standpoint, I don't have to bother to learn Bulgarian if I really didn't want to. I can shop, schedule appointments, get things fixed, pick up packages from the post office, and I do just fine in English most of the time. But what I've learned is that getting by and feeling settled are two very different things. And I don't want to live in any country and just get by. That's not a way to live. You want to thrive when you decide to move abroad. Well, you want to thrive anyway, but particularly when you uproot your entire life and go to a new country, you don't want to just exist. You want it to be an adventure. You want to thrive. And again, I just think not learning the language comes with a low level of anxiety that I would just rather avoid. If you're curious about what learning Bulgarian looks like at this very imperfect level, please like and subscribe. I will be alluding to this topic every now and then as I make videos. If you've had some experience learning a new language, there's always funny stories that go along with that. Please leave those in a comment so that we can all laugh at each other's foibles. I'd really love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.